All right, everybody, welcome back to a very special episode of Mamba Moments. We have here today Lindsay Gottlieb, unbelievable guest. Anyone listening to this knows Kobe's love and support of the women's game, particularly with his daughter Gigi Bryant poised to have been a superstar. That's why I'm so excited to have Lindsay Gottlieb, recently hired head coach of the USC women's basketball team here. I'm usually wearing a polo, got the Trojan shirt today, and also the first NCAA women's basketball coach to ever be brought on as an assistant with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Lindsay, how are you, and how are you feeling about the new gig so far?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm still blown away by this opportunity at USC. I think I'm just totally motivated and excited to coach the young women we have and to build something special going forward. So it's been a wild 2 months, definitely not the NBA offseason as I was maybe expecting, but life takes some crazy turns, and I'm really excited to be back in the women's college game and to be here at USC.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. And so particularly your time with the Cleveland Cavaliers and your success there in the NBA, you got to work with some, we'll call them Kobe disciples like Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance Jr., some guys like Kevin Love who are known fans of Kobe. So I was wondering, whether it was through Kobe's passing, just being the assistant coach, were there any really amazing Kobe Bryant stories you heard, ways Kobe brought you all together, or particular insights that you found interesting?
Well, I think, my Kobe stories, and I think what speaks sort of to his legacy is how so many people have their own unique stories, right? Because I actually think was this larger than life figure that actually had the ability to make you feel like you were important when you were in his presence. So my first one is actually when I was an assistant coach at Cal all the way back. I was trying to learn everything I could about the triangle offense, and I got a chance to go to Lakers training camp. Hooked on with Kurt Rambis and Phil Jackson, and Kobe was on the team. And I was trying to be, learning the offense. And all I wanted to do was just stare at this young guy, and see what he did and see how he worked. So that was kind of my first moment of his sort of gravitational pull. And then later on, when I was the head coach at Cal, I went to a coaching clinic in Southern California. Kobe was close with the head coach at Vanguard, a man by the name of Russ Davis. And so Kobe spoke at the clinic, which was super cool. And then we all kind of lined up after to have our moment to take a photo and say hello. And I introduced myself. I said, hi, I'm Lindsay, head coach at Cal. And he kind of cut me off and said, I know who you are. I follow you on Twitter and read all your stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, Kobe just said, I know who you are. So those were kind of my own personal moments with him. And then, you realize he kind of had that impact on a lot of people, where he made them feel important. Going to the NBA, I think what I was struck by is, he was your favorite basketball player's favorite basketball player, right? I mean, the way that other NBA players looked up to him was pretty incredible. And so, JC and Larry were both, with him in LA for that final season. And just to kind of just be around our players, when the news hit of Kobe's, passing and Gigi's passing, I think that's something I'll never forget, because you kind of were in that club. I was in that club of people who were most closely just kind of impacted, and to see the real emotion and these, famous basketball players and how much it struck them. I mean, that was something I think that I'll never forget. And then we also I had one colleague, JJ Outlaw, who coached Kobe for 5 years in Los Angeles. And he told me just a lot of stories about the mentality and how hard Kobe worked and how much film he wanted to watch and all of that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, because, part of the thing on this podcast is sort of that influx of Kobe's stories and how we got to keep hearing those, because they've always been so motivational and inspirational. So always amazing to hear new ones. Thank you very much for that. Another moment with Kobe of yours that I really wanted to ask about is when you were coach of the California Golden Bears. Talia Caldwell wrote a piece for the New York Times that before a Final Four game, Kobe gave a message to the team, and, it was like a grainy message on the cell phone, 2013. And so I was wondering actually what that message said, was going to ask, and how the message came to be, how it all kind of came together.
Oh yeah, I can't believe I didn't tell that one first. That's crazy. And we still have it. So it was actually when we were trying to advance, I believe, to the Sweet 16 in the year that ultimately became the Final Four. And we were on the road, and I got a message from back at Cal that Kobe was there, with the Lakers, and he was in the midst of an ankle injury. And being Kobe, he wanted to get extra treatment or do anything he could, to get back healthy and get the edge. And so I think they were in town to play the Warriors, and he was looking for a place that had an aqua therapy. And so, Cal had one of the underwater treadmills or what have you, and he wanted to get a workout in or use the equipment. And so I guess the people who let him into the building said, hey, of course, I'll come in late, I'll let you in, but we do have a women's basketball team that's about to play a really big game maybe it was our Elite Eight game to advance to the Final Four. And could you, would you mind, reaching out to them, or would you, he said, how can I thank you guys? And they said, we have a women's basketball team, playing, can you send a message? And so I got this message on my phone from Kobe saying, to the Cal women's team, just wanted to thank you for letting me use the facilities. And I hear you got a really big game today, go crush it. It was unbelievable. So I played it for the team that morning at breakfast, and you would have thought we had just won the national championship. I mean, they were so pumped. And so we all joked about that was our little hidden good luck charm, of how we give us the extra little motivation to make it to the Final Four.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And that's definitely one of the rarer Kobe stories, to actually know what he said and for him to appreciate that. That's really, really cool. So to get a little bit deeper, obviously we know, Kobe's connection to the women's game, and particularly in his post-basketball years, how much he was trying to influence the game. So one question I wanted to ask, just with your insight and your own connection and the success within the women's game, is, do you think it was simply Kobe having daughters that influenced his love and wanting to influence the women games? Or did you ever have conversations or insights that there was something deeper there as well?
So I think, this is just my take, right? This is my perception of it from my seat kind of close by. I do think it was his next act, right? I think that, as many of us know just from studying, this is a brilliant man, right? He was brilliant on the basketball court, but in every way off the court as well, from his experiences living in Italy and speaking multiple languages to his, kind of eye for art and like where he was going. I think he was ready to do the next thing after basketball and have as much of an impact away from basketball. And I think it was, his daughters, and particularly Gigi with her love of the game and her drive, that kind of shifted him into that world of youth basketball, and particularly girls basketball and coaching. And so I think that's what kind of drew him back to the game, and kind of changed him, and made him someone, I think what was his persona as a player, which was, I'm going to be so driven and I'm not going to have friends and I'm going to be this ultra competitor, which was what made him the Mamba. I think in this idea of his second act as a coach, it was his willingness to help everybody. And what I think, again, from my vantage point, is I have a lot of contact with younger girls, particularly on the West Coast, who play basketball. And the impact that they have felt from Kobe the dad, from Kobe the basketball coach, not just Kobe the Mamba, the player, it's both. I cannot overstate that impact. There are so many girls who he touched work ethic. He really empowered them. They got to work out with him. They got to see him work out with girls. Like they mattered to him, in which case I think they believe in their worth as basketball players. Are some of them going to become WNBA players? Maybe, but many won't. But this idea that they were believed in. I think there's no question that from that vantage point, that kind of second act or next act for him was incredibly powerful, and will have ripple effects on youth basketball, particularly on the West Coast and in the girls' game for many, many years to come.
Absolutely. No, that's incredible insight. Really appreciate you sharing that. Not sure there's many people I could go to for better insight on it than that. And also, I'll mention it again at the end of the of the podcast. But all proceeds that I'm personally able to make will go to the Mamba and Mombasita Sports Foundation, which is just an incredible charity supporting exactly what we're talking about here. And one other idea Kobe spoke about that I wanted to ask you about: the final Kobe Bryant article released during his lifetime was by CNN 4 days before the tragedy, saying he believes that women can and will one day play in the NBA. Well, this was obviously partially setting up Gigi, something his trainer, Tim Grover, later admitted this is part of what he was trying to do. Do you believe that this concept is feasible? And what is a way that we can possibly get there? I know I agree with it, especially with, what Sabrina Ionescu is doing in the NBA. Her game winners would translate anywhere, but would love to hear your perspective on that.
I mean, I think, we need to focus on women's basketball and, kind of getting the attention it deserves, getting the growth that we all know it can still attain. That's where my mind is. I believe in the synergy between men's and women's basketball, between the WNBA and the NBA, men's and women's college. It's funny, my life this last 2 months coming from the NBA back to college is like a living proof of it, right? Like I'll have a conversation with a 19-year-old player I'm coaching, a former NBA player who wants to work out, a recruit, and I'm like, it's all basketball, right? Or
Absolutely.
NBA GMs and high school coaches. And so to me, I think the idea is that excellence is excellence, and women should aim to achieve the highest goals that they can in the world of sports. Do I think there'll be women playing in the NBA? I don't. I think let's make the WNBA as great as it can be. It's a little different than the NBA, but I do think we're going to have women coaches in the NBA. I think we're going to have women GMs. I think we're going to continue to have men's basketball players who support their daughters and women's basketball players in general. And I think that's really the legacy, of Kobe and where we want to get to with this. But I mean, I'm glad he would say something like that. I think he wanted to put something out there that's kind of bold and extreme, but I think the goal is to get the WNBA where we think it can go in terms of exposure and, financial resources. And my thing is basketball continuing to be one of those ambassadors for the synergy of the game, men's and women's.
Well, absolutely, because that can affect society as a whole. And that's a really excellent take on it. I mean, the dub has been phenomenal for a long time. If you were a fan of Kobe growing up, you got into the dub pretty early. And so absolutely, it's growing more than ever right now with the ESPN documentary, with the Slam 25th anniversary cover, and particularly the way that NBA players are supporting it. You don't see that in other professional sports. And I think that's where that synergy can really come in as well. And quite frankly, it's just, to anyone listening, it's an incredibly exciting league. I have a blast watching it, and couldn't recommend tuning in more highly, as well as the college team. Got to cover the USC women's team, and they got some ballers on that team. So stay tuned for sure, especially with new incredible coach Lindsay here. So Lindsay, I think this might be the final question of the day here, and it actually ties into what you were speaking about. So what do you think that sports journalists and fans can learn from Kobe's support of the women's game to become a better support or advocate, and overall how doing this can impact sports and society as a whole?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the numbers bear it out. I don't claim to be an expert, but just kind of someone who's a really interested, sort of involved person. Cover the game more. There's no question that it shows, it's proven that the more we cover the women's game, the more the viewership rises, that there is a market for it, right? That it's not just a values proposition anymore, which, in college it is, there's, we deserve equal, treatment and equal resources. But when you talk about the pros, which is a financial kind of, it's a financial model, it's a business. It's proven that the more women's games are covered, the more female athletes that are covered, there is an audience for it. There are people who want to spend marketing dollars. There are fans who want to, buy jerseys. And so I would say to journalists who I know don't get to choose everything, but like editors and people in positions of power, feature these stories because, that there is an audience for it. And I think Kobe was the biggest star, the biggest influencer to say, hey, I just love this game, and I'm involved in it. But other people following suit has helped to grow the game, and hopefully the dollars and the people with the resources will continue to follow, and that's how the game will grow. I think it's there's proof in it. And then I would say to people, I've never met very many people who have come to a women's college basketball game or a WNBA game and not been racing to find out how they can come back. They love it. It's the connection with the players, feel a connection to them. It's the quality of the play. It's the type of game and the style that it is. People want to come back. So make that first attempt at it, watch it, attend it. And I think, that'll help to grow the game, because there's not a lot of people who say, I'm not coming back. They all want to come back.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I got to cover a USC women's game last year, and I can't wait to do it again for sure. Love writing articles about them, and just really great sport. Really fun to watch, graceful, stylish, just I don't know. It adds a whole other aspect to the game, and it's really awesome. Since we do have a bit of time here, I got one more surprise question. So
Okay.
Kobe, a little bit more technical, talk some basketball here. So with Kobe's game, obviously guys like Anthony Davis, they're using their size. They're 6'11". With Kobe's game, there was obviously a lot of footwork, a lot of shooting touch, a lot of understanding of the game from a mental perspective. So I was wondering, in your perspective, which women's player, either in the WNBA or that you've coached, is the most similar to Kobe's game, and why?
Oh, wow. That's it's a great question. Just, you mentioned WNBA first. So the first person that I think of is Jewel Lloyd. I know she spent a lot of time around him as well. But when you talk about the nuances of being able to get to your spot, use your footwork, use angles, her style of game, sort of being a scorer from the wing, but also able to create for other people. I think, she's the one whose game right away just sort of came to my mind. But I think you see little pieces of his mentality in a lot of different people, right? I think it's become synonymous with just mental toughness, that Mamba mentality. So I think you see that woven. But I would say, just as far as footwork, angles, all the nuances of the game, just player for player, I would say Jewel probably is the person whose game matches up maybe the most closely, just off the top of my head.
That's amazing. I'll definitely be tuning into her game a little bit more closely after hearing that as well. I do know her affinity for Kobe, but hearing it from your perspective is great. Lindsay, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I love to give people their flowers at the end as well. So, for coming on and just the work you've done in the NBA, coaching the Cleveland Cavaliers, in the women's collegiate game, the success with the Cal Golden State Bears, and now what you're going to do with USC. Again, I got to cover them. I know the talent here combined with your skill set. Watch out for the USC women's basketball program, the Women of Troy. It's going to be something really special. And so, Lindsay, tell everyone, where can we find you these days, on socials or wherever?
Yep. So I'm at Coach Lindsay G. That's both my Instagram and my Twitter. And USC WBB is our program handle. So hopefully everyone will follow. I'm really big on transparency. So just definitely people can see what we're about, what we're doing, learn about the personalities on our team. But I think we're poised to do something special. So I'm looking forward to the journey with our Trojan fans and everyone else who wants to hop on board.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing today. As I said earlier, all proceeds that I'm personally able to make will go to the Mamba and Mambacita Sports Foundation to keep supporting women's sports. And if you've listened to this whole thing and you're not motivated by that, go watch a nice WNBA game or some NCAA women's college basketball coming up soon. Yeah, for definitely. Sure. So thank you so much for coming on, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Mamba out, Mamba forever. Wow, talk about interviewing a goat of goats who's interviewed most of the goats. Roy's stories and insights were absolutely incredible. Everyone, please remember to download, subscribe, rate, and review, because that will help any and all proceeds that I make go to the Mamba and Mambacita Sports Foundation so we continue celebrating the life and legacy of Kobe Bryant. If there's anything you learned from this episode, it should be that through talking about someone who, while not perfect, lived their life to the fullest, you can gain incredible insights and stories from other people about their lives. And that's a large part of what this podcast is about. Next up, we're going to have Matthew Peralta, Lakers Nation staff writer, and I'm going to have a very special announcement about my own career that might relate to something to do with Lakers Nation. So stay tuned for some amazing insight and a great episode coming up soon. Mamba out, Mamba forever.